Monthly Q&A is back with Power Republic. So, welcome back to the Power Republic YouTube channel. We've thrown the vibes out on the interwebs and people have come back with some great questions, which we are going to tackle this week. We've got chassis questions, tools questions, driver questions, all ranging, all encompassing for everybody. So let's get to it. Quick disclaimer from your friends at Power Republic, we don't always pronounce everyone's name perfectly and we apologize for that in advance. So the first questions come from Forgotten Gamer. He's got a couple in there. And the first part of his question is, when is a chassis past its best in its form of performance, seeing as though the big teams change chassis every 2 or 3 meetings? So basically you can replace your go-karts as often as you want if you've got this massive budget, but most people that are racing go-karts are generally pretty budget conscious. I think once a year is more than enough. So at the start of your racing season you buy a new chassis, you're going to get the best out of that chassis for the whole racing season, and then at the end of the year you can move it on to one of the new guys that's starting out and you can just step yourself into another new chassis for the next year. That way you're getting sort of 10, 12, 15, 20 races depending on how much racing that you're doing. But I think that's probably more than enough. We were recently doing testing with a chassis from last October and a brand new one from this February, and the crossover between the two karts was negligible, if not zero. So almost impossible to measure. I think the big teams will change their chassis. Maybe they're not running curb sliders. Maybe they're hitting curbs and just generally grinding the chassis out. Plus they're doing a lot of practice in between their race meetings. So they feel that they're getting better results with the brand new chassis, and that's why they're changing them every 2 to 3 meetings. So another part of the Forgotten Gamer question is about the Tony Kart axles. Is it better to buy the genuine Tony Kart axle or the cheaper non-branded axle, and are they made in the same factory? The answer to that question is no, they're not made in the same factory. The Tony Kart make the Tony Kart axles. I don't know who makes all the other axles. Now the beauty of you running the Tony Kart axles, there's a grading system and you can easily run harder axles or softer axles. And if you call me and say, hey Des, I'm having this problem, I can say, oh well, your axle's too soft or your axle's too hard, because we know where you are in the spectrum of the Tony Kart axles. Where the non-genuine axles sit in that spectrum, I'm not sure. I don't use them myself personally. I know plenty of people that do. If you want to try to save some money, you can buy a Pro Design or a non-genuine axle, and I'm sure it works perfectly fine. But I just stick with the Tony Kart axles. You basically only need your medium axle, one harder and one softer, and that's going to get you out of, say, 90% of the problems that you're going to turn up with. Sorry, 90% of the problems you're going to run into on a go-kart track. So if you've got those two things, it's not a deal breaker. Save up your money, buy those axles, one harder, one softer, plus your medium, which pretty much works everywhere, and go from there. So the last part we're going to cover today from the Forgotten Gamer is talking about loose bars, loose bumpers, tight bars, tight bumpers, and when to use them for tuning. So basically, if the kart is not reacting how you want it, you can start to tighten and loosen the bars. Now, the kart is essentially a spring. As you drive into a corner, it bends and twists through the waist. Now, if it's not twisting enough, you can stiffen the bars to make it sort of twist more in the waist. That's in the front. Or if it's going around the corners and it's starting to hop, so it's twisting too much, but it feels like it's a little bit soft through the center, we can start to tighten the rear of the kart and loosen the front of the kart. So you're putting less twist into the chassis and the back is resisting the twisting forces. So it is a matter of preference and a little bit of tuning for the circuit. I can't answer it for all karts in all conditions, but if you've got a problem, make sure you write down what your problem is and apply a solution. And if it's wrong, it doesn't matter. At least then next time you know not to do harder bars in the front, and you can do the softer bars in the front, and vice versa in the rear. So it's a matter of testing and tuning. It's not super critical. We go up and down the spectrum all the time, and the driver just complains more or less, but his lap times are essentially the same. So don't try to think, oh, I'm just going to change one axle grade and boom, I'm going to be the fastest go-kart driver in the world. The go-kart will go fast if you've been practicing a lot and driving a lot, and if you're a little bit old and rusty, your times are going to suffer. And if you're red hot because you've just been racing every day for months and months and months on end, you'll be red hot and dominating. So the cart setup is just to massage the cart for your personal preferences. The next question comes from Fightman22, and he was asking about how to make a good start, both rolling starts and with KZ. So first up, we'll start with the KZ. Now, I am not a KZ racer, so I can't really answer this from a personal point of view, but I've asked plenty of other guys. And you have to balance the clutch pickup on the start line with the throttle down at 100% and bouncing off the rev limiter with your foot on the brake, and then as the light go greens, you fan the clutch, let your foot off the brake, and hammer off down the track. Now, it's going to take a lot of clutches and practice, but it's just something you're going to have to do to get that good burnout on the start line. And maybe some of the other people that have more experience in the KZs can write in the comment section below and help us with this question. Now for the rolling start, what I like to do is as I'm entering the straight around the last corner in formation, I put my foot down on the brake and then slowly increase the brake pressure and the accelerator pressure at the same time. So you're stalling the engine up. And what that does is it makes the exhaust pipe nice and hot, and it gives the engine plenty of temperature, and what it avoids is loading up the spark plug and giving it like a really slow response off the start. So if you roll into the start, blipping the throttle on and off to control your speed, you can do that, that works. But what I like to do is hold a constant throttle, really load up the engine with the brake and the accelerator, and then as the light goes green, I step off the brake, put the accelerator all the way down, and take off into that first corner, full guns blazing. The next question comes from Cormac Dowdell, and he was asking about what the power valve does on the old style Rotax 125 race engine. So the power valve, Cormac, it is for your exhaust port duration. Now, if you run a low exhaust port, i.e. similar to a Junior Max, you get incredible bottom end performance, but then as the RPMs increase, the exhaust pipe is not as effective in the higher RPM range, so that your top RPM power suffers. Now, the Senior Max engine has a power valve, so you get, when it's closed, you get good bottom end between 6,500 and 7,500 RPM when it opens, and then from 7,500 RPMs up to its red line, you get great performance increase by having a really high exhaust port and a long exhaust duration. These are some of the things you can Google in two-stroke performance, which is exhaust port duration. There's some great animations online, so check those out as well. So to surmise your question there, Cormac, the power valve on the Rotax Max changes the exhaust port duration. The next question is from Rob34, and he was asking, I'm struggling for front grip in my 125 Rotax. Is there something I can do? Now, if you're struggling for front grip, predominantly, so every circuit you go to, you're understeering everywhere, and you're having to dial in a lot of positive camber, front bars. What else could you do? You know, a little bit of toe out, you know, stiff front bar in your crash bars. If you're doing that all the time, maybe you have got your front to rear distribution askew. So what you want to do is get yourself a set of corner weight scales. So you can get bathroom scales, or you can get the fancy long acre racing corner weight scales. It all depends on your budget, and weigh your go-kart. Now, if the go-kart is 60-40 and you're having understeer, well, move your percentage weight forward to 42 and 58. So basically, if you're understeering all the time, what I'll do is start to move some of my weight forward, either the lead ballast or moving your seat. So if your seat is at, say, 1040 from the kingpin to the back of the seat, I don't know how you measure it, just take the measurement and then move the seat maybe 16 millimeters forward, drill some new holes, bolt it in, and go for another spin. And that may help with your understeer front grip problems. So the next question is from Eric Chin, and he was asking about weight distribution, funnily enough, and he is asking for an optimum weight distribution, and does it change for different classes? So what I would say is that basically you want to change your weight distribution depending on your kart preference. So basically, you want to start around the 58-42 weight distribution split. That's 58% rear weight, 42% to the front. Now, if you're still getting a lot of understeer, move some more weight forward or move your seat forward, and that will cure some of your understeer issues, and then vice versa. If you're having big power oversteer everywhere, like you would in, say, a KZ car, then you can move your seat further and further back to get closer to your 60-40. Different classes have different weight distribution. The cadets traditionally can run closer to 50-50 because they've got the same size tyre in every corner of the kart. Whereas your senior karts have bigger tyres in the rear so they can carry a bit more load. And that's why we generally set the seats back and the weight back in the senior kart. Also too, on the KZ style kart and the DD2, you've got a lot of power and you want to get it down to the track as fast as you can off the corner. It's a big advantage so that you run the seat further back so you get great acceleration grip, and also too to resist the kart being unstable when you put your foot on the brake, because obviously on the DD2 and the KZ you're running front brakes. So it wants to lift the back of the kart up off the track. So if you sit further in the back, it's going to resist that motion and you're going to get a better braking performance. Now with your traditional Rotax kart, that's not a problem, so that you can start to move your seat a little bit further forward. If you're liking these videos, please consider subscribing and turning on the notifications. It really means a lot. The next question comes from our good friend Kev Davies, The Noise, and he's a commentator here in Australia. Everybody loves Kev, especially me. And Kev, great question. He's asking, how do the quick drivers go to a new track and dial in just 4 to 5 sessions, and how can the kids learn from this? So what I would say is, if you go to a new track and you're struggling with it, get behind another driver and start to imitate what they are doing and integrate that into your game. So you'll have a certain skill set, but when you go to a new track, those skills you might be using like a good habit or a bad habit, but you won't know unless you pair yourself up against some of the other drivers. So all the good drivers, when they go to the new tracks, they're going to look for the low-hanging fruit by following some of the local kids and people that have been there before, just to learn those couple little things the quickest way. You will get there if you practice all on your own, guaranteed, but it's just going to take longer. So you don't have a lot of time on a race meeting, so you want to go out with some of the better drivers and really just try to study them, study what they do. You can watch from the sidelines, you can video certain corners. I always say to my guys that you want to concentrate on the corners that precede the longest straights, work on those the most, because you'll gain the biggest time difference on that corner and then down the next straightaway. Whereas if you get something wrong on the corner that precedes the straight, you're going to lose another 0.3 of a second, and you'll be scratching your head going, oh my god, I'm so off the pace, what the hell's going on? It must be the axle or the tyres or something like this, when it might just be something simple like the entry into that corner. You might be going too fast, too narrow, too wide, a whole myriad of problems. So focus on the corners that precede the biggest straights, and then you'll get the biggest time difference in your advantage. Okay, so we've got a great question from our friend Hobbsy out in Warwick, and Nick Hobbs asks, how do you establish your gear ratio, and is it set for minimum and maximum revs? So I know Nick, and he runs a Rotax engine out of Warwick, and what I'd say to Nick is you want to set your gear ratio up for its maximum RPMs of around 14,000 RPM and its minimums of around 6,800 to 7,000. That's for the Rotax. Now for an X30 at your local track, you want to gear them up for the 15.9, 15.8 to 16,000 range. That's their rev limiter. So if you can gear it to 15.8, then if you're in the draft of anyone else, you've got a couple hundred RPM, just a little bit of over rev there. Now if you've got a Galaxy engine, very similar. 16,000 is about the happy place for those engines at their peak RPM, and their minimum is about 8,000. So if you can keep your car in the window there for your RPM. So change your gear ratios when you get to a track. For example, if the recommended gearing is a 1080, well, put the 1080 on and then go out in another session and put a 1083 and then come in and put a 1077, and that's going to give you an idea of what to look for with your gear ratios for a specific track. And if you've got a 3-teeth variation, it's going to be pretty obvious that, okay, more teeth was better or less teeth was better, and then you can start to hone in on one tooth either way, so like a 79 or a 78. So the next question comes from our OG subscriber, Chris Ramnouth from Trinidad, and he's always got a great question for us. Chris asks about the Rotax jetting. How do you optimize the Rotax jets? Because you can actually run them on, say, 3 or 4 different jets, but he wants to know how to optimize it. He states that he'll just go leaner on his jetting until the Rotax popped and then come back a jet, and wanted to know if that's the same for the new carbies. So what I like to do is I like to optimize my jetting through practice. I know that generally when I get to a track I'm going to start with, like I say, a 122 jet on the new Evos or a 158 on the old non-Evo Rotax. And then if the jetting is not quite right in sense it's too rich, the engine won't rev all the way to its sort of peak RPM of 14,000. It'll start to hesitate in the high 12s and low 13s. So I'm just going to drop it down one jet for that. And then conversely, if it's too lean, it'll start to bog off the corner and hesitate. And then in the mid to upper top end RPM, it's going to start to pop and carry on. And then I know it's just too lean and I've got to go up one. So it really is just a case of trial and error. Also too, the newer carb, the Evos, you can lean them out until they pop. That's probably not ideal. What I try to do is just sort of, feel if the engine's pulling hard off the corners and you're still getting maximum RPMs, and then the jetting is perfect. I don't try to fuss over it too much. There's way too many other things I like to focus on, like my own driving and making sure I'm braking, steering and accelerating in all the right places. Okay, so Jason Smith asks about gearing as well, and he wants to know when to go down or up on your rear sprocket, i.e. for grippy or loose conditions and wet and dry conditions. So what I say is, for me with the gear ratio, it's mostly for being able to pass one of your competitors at a certain place on the track. So the gear ratio is not going to change your overall lap time. If you put teeth on, you're going to come faster off the corners, but you're going to be slow on the straights. And then if you go down on teeth, you're going to be slower off the corners and faster down the straights. So you're going to be able to pass the people at the end of the main straight with less teeth. So it's super important. If you need to go down one or two teeth in between a heat race, just to be able to pass that competitor at the end of the straight or a different part of the circuit. Now, if it does rain, you can generally change your front sprocket on your go-kart down one, which is about the equivalent of 6 rear sprocket teeth. And what that does is it gives you incredible acceleration. So the two things that happen in the wet is you have lower corner speeds and you're not on the straight as long because you come onto them later and you back off the throttle earlier. So because you have a shorter straight, you can put some more teeth on because you need to get out of the corners from a lower speed, so you need more teeth for that, and you're going to back off earlier, so your top end speed is not as critical. So in the wet, you can change one full sprocket if you like, which is equivalent to 6 rear teeth on the rear. Okay, so Mitch Curry asks, for the newbies, what is it the best to invest in? A new car, new tyres, more tools, or driver training? And what I say is you want to get the fundamentals down early. So if you're very new to go-karting, get yourself a decent second-hand kart package and go and use the kart for maybe 500 to 1,000 laps to get familiar with the controls. And then, once you've done that, hire a better driver or a driver training or a driver school or a driver coach and get them to teach you the fundamentals so that you can really hone in and practice those fundamentals until you become the boss. That's where you'll get the biggest gains. And also to tyres. You need to have new tyres as often as you can afford. So the next question comes from Jared Kirk, and he was asking about rattle guns. I would use and recommend this Makita rattle gun. Now, disclaimer, these guys don't pay me anything for saying this. This is just what I like and what I use. This is a brushless version. It's got heaps of torque. It's got 4 torque settings. 2 is generally enough for most things. 3 and 4 are super fast and super high torque. You're going to break a lot of wheel nuts and stuff like that if you have those. So make sure you turn it down to 2 if you're doing up your wheel nuts. Forward and reverse. And you can just get your impact socket attachments, and then you can put all your sockets in hex, whatever you've got. And these are very good. So Jared also asked about the importance of emptying your fuel and putting fresh fuel in for a race weekend. And what I would say is, yes, you want to have the freshest fuel mixed up, ready for racing. You want to always put your best foot forward. New chains, new sprockets, new tyres, new fuel, new oil. Everything's new, fresh, ready to go, because it is a competition. If you're just putting around on a practice weekend, it doesn't matter. The fuel, if it's not fresh, it's not going to affect your performance, and you can go out and putt around, do all your practice, and that's excellent. But if you're racing, always run with fresh fuel. Now, I will say this, most race meetings, especially the bigger ones, are going to have a control fuel from a specific service station. So make sure you read your supplementary regulations and you get the correct fuel for the race weekend. The next question comes from our friend Luca Kane over in Bahrain, and he asks, how many wins do you have? And my answer is I'm not too sure on how many wins specifically, but I can tell you that I'm always looking for the next one. So it doesn't matter if you win this week, next week is a new race and you've got to go win that. So there's no point keeping score. You just need to do your best every week and try and win as much as you can and have a winning attitude, and then you'll be able to go out and dominate. Okay, so the next one is another Rotax jetting question that comes from Sherlock34, and he's asking about what we do in the wet for the Rotax jetting. And what I would say is that because the humidity goes right up when it rains, it's close to 100%, if not 100%, you're going to want to lean the jetting out. Also too, you can put a hotter spark plug in, and what happens is with all the moisture, you're off throttle for longer around the corners as well, so it gives the engine time to cool down. So with your Rotax, make sure you tape up your radiator, or you take some of the water out, run with the flap down, whatever you got to do to try to get the temperature up to 55 degrees. And also you can run a hotter spark plug and leaner jetting. So you could go down maybe say 2 main jets, maybe 2 clip positions if you can, or you could change your float level maybe 0.2, 0.4 of a millimeter. Okay, so the next question comes from the Dead Saint, and he's asking about air filters and how often I clean them and what oil I use, if I use any. So what I like to do is to wash my air filter out on a Monday, let it to dry, and then re-oil it with some air filter oil and put it back in the cart. Now, if you've got 2 filters, that's great. You can have one clean in a bag and one in the cart. You can race on the weekend, pull the air filter out during the week's maintenance on Monday or Tuesday night, switch the filters over, wash out filter 1, put filter 2 in the cart, and then you're ready to go for next week as well. So the next question is from Team Grimmer Racing, and they're asking about wet weather as well. This is a great question, and he asks, what are the top 3 things to change for the wet weather setup? And this could be from the driver or the kart. Now, when you're driving in the wet, the best thing is practice. It doesn't rain all the time, but as soon as it does, you want to head to the track. Driving in the wet really sharpens your skills because there's not a lot of grip, and you've got to really sort of feel everything. You've got to turn, and you can't accelerate or brake while you're steering, and you can't really do that in the dry either, but in the wet it's really amplified. So if you have some bad technique, it's going to be really amplified in the wet. So you want to make sure you brake in a straight line, steer hard and directly at the corners, and then accelerate out in as straight a line as possible. Now with wet weather tyres, it's not as critical, but definitely if you're stuck out there on slicks, that's something that you've got to do. And you just need to practice those things. I can't tell you what to do. You've just got to go out on the track and try it for yourself. Now, as for chassis changes, what I would recommend is front bars can go in for the stiffening up of the front of the chassis. You can run maximum width on the front, so bringing your front wheels all the way out, and you can put in the full caster and the full camber. So a bit of positive camber and the full caster, because you're trying to get the kart to twist and steer as good as you can in the wet, because it really does want to understeer all the time. And there's not a lot of traction between the rubber and the wet bitumen, so that you don't get a lot of rubber grip. So you've got to try to get the kart to jack so it'll steer by twisting the kart through the center. And to do that, you need to have a really wide front track and as much rigidity in the front of the kart as you can. So inverse of that is I like to take my seat stays off in the rear, put in a soft axle, and maybe put on some bigger rear hubs. Sorry Team Grimmer, I think that might be more than 3 things, but you can pick and choose what works best for you. So the next question is from Daniel Razile, and he is asking about the comparison between the X30 and the Rotax engine building schedules. Now this is pretty simple. The X30 is a little bit more high maintenance than the Rotax equivalent. The X30 engine, we're replacing pistons in the sort of 10 to 12 hour range, whereas the Rotax you can push all the way up to the 20 hours, especially if you're club day racing. For national karting events, we're putting new pistons in our X30s and Galaxies before we go to the event. For the Rotax, you can pretty much run half the season with your piston and ring with no negligible effects. Now the next one could be a little bit of a cheeky question from Who Is Dean, and he's asking how he wins, and my simple answer is you practice, and you practice a lot. and you practice more than everyone else, Dean, because if you want to be the best, you don't want shortcuts. You want to work harder than everyone else so that you can dominate everybody else that you ever come up against. And the only way to do that is practice. 10,000 hours is the bare minimum, so you need to get out there and start racing. The next question is from Victor Tyem, and he is asking about his height. He's 195 centimeters and he's quite tall by karting standards, and he's wondering what he needs to do for his kart and for his setup. And what I'd say for you is, Victor, I would get a 32mm kart because you're a big guy, so you're going to be able to bend the chassis rails. So generally for anyone that's over 6'2", I'm putting them in a 32mm Tony kart 801 or an equivalent. And for that you want to have the kart pretty stiff because you're going to bend the kart quite easily as you go through the corners. If you get in a kart that's too thin and the chassis rails are too soft, as you drive through the corners, you will start to hop uncontrollably and there'll be nothing you can do, being axle grade changes, hub lengths, seat stays, different types of hardness of seat, all those things. Doesn't matter which way you go, you're never going to get rid of the sort of that hopping through the corner. And that's a classic of the chassis is too soft for you or you're too big for it. It'd be the same as me driving around in a 28mm kart. I'd go through the corners and I wouldn't be able to tune that out. So if you're a tall driver or a heavy driver or you've got really big shoulders, make sure you try to get a 32mm kart with a 50mm axle, and maybe you can lie your seat down a little bit, i.e. just, we did the seat installation video and you can check that out in the link below, where we put a couple of sprockets under the front of the seat just to rock the seat back a little bit, and that helps bring your shoulders down in the car. So the next question is a weight distribution from Rick Jakes, and he was asking about his 59-41 weight distribution split, and he's got power oversteer. So should he move his seat or do something else like a rear width change or an axle change? Now, I can only sort of guess at this one, but if you've got power oversteer, you could put on a set of bigger rear hubs. That helps me with power oversteer. And I can make sure my track is not too narrow. Sometimes you can get instability under braking and power oversteer if you're too narrow. So if you're 1375, 1385, you could go out closer to your 1400. And also too, putting on a bigger set of hubs like the sort of double screw, double knuckle hub, 115mm on the 50mm axle, something like that. So the next question is from our friends Drive AU, and they are asking about different hub materials, i.e. aluminium and magnesium, and also to 25mm stub axles versus the 17mm stub axles. Now I myself personally haven't had a huge performance difference by changing from magnesium to alloy hubs. Most of my tuning will come from a different hub length, so going from a standard 90mm hub to 115 or down to a 77. So I like to have three little options there: a shorter, a standard and a longer. And when I would use those is, so say I had acceleration oversteer or power on oversteer from the apex to the exit, I'd go to a slightly bigger hub. Or if it's really hot and sticky and the kart's sort of labouring off the corner, I'll go from my standard hub or my long hub down one to my standard or my shorter hub. So that's what I do there. I don't really worry about aluminium hubs. On the rear, I always use magnesium because they don't sweat up on the axle as much. And I definitely like the genuine Tony kart magnesium hubs over the non-genuines because they don't have the same problem of the magnesium sticking to the axle and makes it really hard to get the hubs on and off. The second part of the question was about the 17 or the 25mm stub axles. Okay, so the 17s are going to give you a lighter feeling in the steering, and the kart's going to sort of pivot a little quicker in the front. It's going to be a little bit more reactive, whereas the 25s are a little bit more subtle in the feeling, and you're probably going to use them on your tag and your Rotax kart, and then your KA or your 100cc racing, you can use the 17mm stub axles. Also too, if you go to a bigger circuit with open flowing corners, the 25mm are going to give you a good solid stability through the fast corners, where if you go to a track with a lot of tight twisty corners, then I'm going to put my 17mm stub axles with my smaller hubs on. Okay, so it's a pretty lengthy video here, but thanks to everyone that sent in a question. That's pretty much everyone that we got a question from this week. If you've got any questions, save them up. We'll be doing another Q&A in a month's time. Please consider subscribing and turning on the notifications. And follow along on Instagram and Facebook at Power Republic, or go to our website www.powerrepublic.com. Grab yourself a t-shirt or a new Tony Kart axle. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. When do we replace our chassis, i.e. No, that's wrong. So another part of a Racing Gamer, is it Racing Gamer? No, Forgotten Gamer. And I'm in the tram tracks following the... Okay, so the next question is from Rob22. Now, there's two things that happen in the wets. Some more for you. That's a bit. I'll start again. And thanks very much for watching. No, we don't say that, do we?